300. That's not a statistic. That's not an estimate from some cold case file. That is the number of young girls one man claims to have murdered across 3 countries over nearly a decade while walking completely free. His name is Pedro López, and by the time you finish this video, you'll understand something far more disturbing than his crimes. You'll understand why the system that caught him decided to let him go, and why, right now, at this very moment, no one on earth knows where he is. Pedro Alonso López was born in 1948 in Tolima, Colombia, a region already drowning in political violence during a civil war known simply as La Violencia. He was one of 13 children. His mother worked as a sex worker to feed them. There was no father. There was no safety. And at the age of 8, his mother caught him in a situation with his younger sister and threw him out of the house, permanently. An 8-year-old, alone on the streets of a war-torn country. Let that sit for a second. Within days, a stranger approached him, an older man who promised food, shelter, protection. Pedro followed him because what choice did he have? That man sexually assaulted him repeatedly for months. Eventually, Pedro escaped. He was taken in by an American couple and enrolled in a school for orphaned boys. You might think this is where the story turns around. It doesn't. A male teacher at the school began abusing him systematically. Pedro ran away at the age of 12, and this time, he never let anyone get close again. Now, I'm not telling you this to justify what comes next. Nothing justifies what comes next. But if you want to understand how a human being becomes what Pedro López became, you have to understand that whatever was human in him was destroyed before he ever had a chance. By his late teens, Pedro was a drifter. He survived by petty theft across Colombia and was eventually arrested and sentenced to prison. Inside, he was gang raped by multiple inmates. According to López himself, he tracked down and killed 3 of them while still incarcerated. When he was released, something had changed, something final. He later told investigators that he began killing in 1969. His targets, girls between the ages of 9 and 12, primarily from indigenous communities in Peru, Colombia, and Ecuador. Communities so poor, so isolated, that when a child disappeared, there was often no one with enough power to demand an investigation. And this is where the horror truly begins. Because Pedro López didn't just kill. He described his method in chilling, specific detail during his later confession. He would approach girls in marketplaces. He would offer them small gifts or promise their mothers he could give the child work. He was calm. He was patient. He was methodical. And then he would take them somewhere isolated, and he would look into their eyes as the life left them. He said, in his own words, that the moment of death gave him a feeling he described as gentle. He said he preferred to kill at sunrise because he wanted to see their faces clearly. Over the course of nearly 10 years, across 3 countries and thousands of miles of jungle, mountain, and neglected communities, Pedro López moved like a ghost. And no one connected the dots, not because the evidence wasn't there, but because the victims were invisible, poor, indigenous, female, forgotten. In 1980, in the small town of Ambato, Ecuador, Pedro López attempted to abduct a young girl from an outdoor market, but this time, something went wrong for him. The girl's mother saw it happen. She screamed, and within seconds, a group of indigenous market vendors surrounded López and overpowered him. They beat him, they restrained him. Some wanted to kill him on the spot. But a missionary, an American missionary who happened to be nearby, intervened and convinced the crowd to hand him over to the police. That decision saved Pedro López's life. Whether it saved anyone else's, that's a different question. We'll get to that. When the Ecuadorian police first interrogated López, they didn't take him seriously, a drifter making wild claims about hundreds of murders. They assumed he was mentally ill or lying for attention. Then he offered to show them the graves. He led investigators to 53 burial sites across Ecuador alone, 53 bodies of young girls. Some had been there for years. The authorities were stunned. This was not a serial killer by any definition they had encountered. This was something systematic, something industrial in its efficiency. He confessed to 110 murders in Ecuador, 100 in Colombia, and in his words, many more than 100 in Peru. If even a fraction of his claims were true, Pedro López was the most prolific serial killer in modern history. Here's where this story becomes something else entirely. Something that will make you question everything you believe about justice. Ecuador, in 1980, had a maximum prison sentence of 16 years. That's it. No matter what you did, 16 years was the ceiling. Pedro López was convicted of 110 murders. He was sentenced to 16 years. Do the math on that. That's roughly 53 days per murdered child. 53 days for each life he erased. But wait, it gets worse. López was a model prisoner. He was quiet, cooperative. He caused no problems behind bars. And because of that, he qualified for good behavior reductions. In 1998, after serving just 14 years, Pedro López, the man who confessed to murdering over 300 girls, was released from prison. Ecuador immediately deported him to Colombia. But Colombia didn't charge him with any crimes because there were no active cases against him. The murders he committed there had never been properly investigated. The victims had never been reported missing. Invisible in life, invisible in death, invisible in justice. Colombia placed him briefly in a psychiatric institution. In 1999, he was declared sane and then released on $50 bail. $50 for 300 lives. There was public outrage. There were protests. Interpol eventually issued a red notice, their highest level international alert, for Pedro López in 2002. But by then, he was gone, vanished, and no one has confirmed a verified sighting of him since. As of today, Pedro López would be in his late 70s if he's still alive. No one knows. No one can confirm whether he's dead. No one can confirm whether he's living under a false identity in some remote village. And perhaps most disturbingly, no one can confirm whether he stopped killing. Because here's what the behavioral analysts noted during his detention. López showed zero remorse. He expressed no guilt. When asked if he would kill again, he smiled and said, "I am the man of the century. No one will ever forget me." He described his murders with the calm precision of a man recounting a day at work. The psychologist who evaluated him said something that should keep you up at night. There was no indication that his compulsion had diminished. If anything, he seemed eager, and then they let him walk out the door. 300 families, at minimum, never received justice. Most never even received confirmation of what happened to their daughters. The graves Pedro led police to in Ecuador accounted for only a fraction of his claimed victims. Across Peru and Colombia, hundreds of cases remain unresolved. Hundreds of families still don't know. The monster of the Andes wasn't just one man. It was an entire system, a system that treated poor, indigenous girls as disposable, a system that couldn't be bothered to investigate, a system that, when it finally caught the man responsible for the largest killing spree in South American history, gave him 16 years and let him go. Pedro López didn't just exploit his victims, he exploited the world's indifference to them. This is what happens when the world looks away, when the missing don't matter enough to count, when a justice system caps its punishment at 16 years regardless of the crime. And right now, as you sit watching this, Pedro López could be anywhere. If this case disturbed you, and it should, then you need to see what we covered in our last video. The Werewolf of Angarsk, a Russian police officer who murdered 78 women while wearing a badge. That story is just as terrifying, and it's waiting for you right now. Subscribe, because every week we uncover killers the world tried to forget, from countries you'd never expect. Hit that bell, and I'll see you in the next one.